Okay, greetings everyone to webinar 2.1 by Tom Abel, dealing with topic of information and what Odum was trying to say. Tom has requested that we start with discussion, and since there was no discussion from the last time, and then we'll move into his presentation. And he's promised me that it's going to be 1 hour.
That was last week's promise.
He warned me that it was going to be longer than 1 hour.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
So it's problematic for me because I have many other things to do, but we'll see how it goes. All right, Tom.
Sorry,
take
Mark.
it away. Oh, one thing. We have the final mini conference, Emergy mini conference on the 29th of June, which is coming up. I will send out invitations. If you have been watching the others or participating in the others, there's no need for you to send me an email telling me you want to be part of these. I'm sending emails to everyone who has participated prior. If you haven't participated in the prior ones, then do send me an email saying that you would like to participate in them. Okay, take it away, Tom.
Well, take it away, as in, I'd like to open the floor. If anyone recalls a question they had last week, I'm sorry I went so long. We'll try not to go that long this week. But I thought I'd better ask for discussion now if you remember anything of interest from last week, and if you don't think you'll make it to the end of the talk today, possibly. Anybody got anything that they want to bring up? I mean, I can go, but I see Ren Zhongqing. Hello, Haozhou Bujian. A friend from Taiwan I haven't seen for a long time.
Yeah, I passed through Hualien for several times. And I talked to Chou Yiru recently.
Really?
We have a Satoyama initiative, teachers, like professors, like group for East Taiwan University. Yeah, we just start to run it.
Okay.
And I know you perhaps
I really like Ren
together, right?
He's very interesting and quite involved in the environmental issues in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So I'll be working more with him, I think. Anybody about Emergy? I mean, about information, last week's talk about Emergy. It's fine. I will start. Okay, I guess so. Okay, I thought that might work, but it's been a week, and not everyone was here probably last week, and so let me follow the steps. I believe I need to share the screen first. And then go there. And open it. Let's see. Coming, presenter view. There we are. Okay, and I'm gonna hide you guys. No offense, but it's very distracting to me, especially to see my own face talking. So I'll hide myself too. Here's the title of my talk for this week. You can read it there. It's also the title of a paper that's being reviewed actually right now. I'm revising. I got it back from General Systems, and so I'm busily trying to do that at the moment. This is part 2. Last week was more about the emergy of information. This week is about what is information and how Odum saw information, at least as well as I can tell. I'm doing my best to read his. I think in my description I said something about a deep dive I wrote some notes for myself a couple days ago as a way to introduce, so I'll read this. I said last week that a couple years ago, I started my deep dive into reading Odum's books and papers. I had already been working on the parallel cycles idea when I found the Texas highway study in the Crawford Prize lecture. I realized that it fit the model and I could use it in a paper, so I wrote one. I think someone's speaker is on, by the way, I heard something. The next thing was to start to try to make sense of information in his writings. You saw last week that I tried to collect all of Dr. Odum's Emergy analyses of information and decipher, untangle, summarize, and review them. But before that, or at the same time, I felt that I should try to understand his ideas about information. What is information for him? In class, he often talked about culture. And there is a lot of that in his writings, not much about information as information theory, although that was in the air at the time. And so he had to deal with it. My impression is that he preferred a culture like information. But maybe more important, how does his information fit into that big body of systems, ideas, and theory for what is nature and life and the earth and humanity? How does this information or culture fit into his big functional model of energy and self-organization and maximum empower and hierarchy that originally attracted me to Dr. Odum's work? For me, I must admit, Emergy analysis was kind of a peripheral interest for sure in the beginning. Cultural anthropology in the older days was only beginning to require empirical tests, evaluations like Emergy. What I wanted to know was what can Emergy theories tell me about function in human societies? Coming from a background with Marvin Harris, I already expected cultural ideas and organization to have functional purpose in some way related to the environment and energy sources and technology, what Harris called the infrastructure. So what is it about Emergy that creates culture in the forms that we find today? And what is it that culture information does in a functional way in human society? Answering those questions will be the second half of my talk. Let me say that again. What is it about energy that creates culture in the forms that we find it? And what is it that cultural information does in a functional way in human society? But before that, for the first half, I need to dig into what exactly did Odum mean by information, by culture, by religion and law, etc. Hopefully, I have pulled out the big themes you will see. But my paper is heavily footnoted, more like a history paper, which could repel some of you, Dr. Brown. I felt a strong need to substantiate any claims that I made about Dr. Odum's information with plenty of citations, but I did not want them to overwhelm the reader, so the evidence is in the footnotes for you to read if you wish. Anyway, I hope you'll read the paper and do your best with it when you get it, hopefully not too long, not too far away. So here's a table of contents, Odum's theory of information I'll do in the beginning, then building on the nested hierarchy of cultural information, but building on Dr. Odum's information, and then building with Dr. Odum's information, and that will address energetics of hierarchy. And then finally, the last shorter part, new nested hierarchy for Emergy analysis. I want to begin with a couple of my favorite quotes. Information may be the most important feature of many systems, including genetic biodiversity and the knowledgeable contributions of human beings. Much of the control of systems is with information. And this one, the geobiosphere has long been carpeted and controlled by life, most recently, predominantly with the activities of 8 billion humans. Even before the emergence of people, Earth processes were controlled by the ecosystems. The living cover controlled the weathering of rocks, the formation of soils, the organization of sediments, the building of reefs, the channels of streams, and the distribution of rains. The organisms of ecosystems, and now humans, are programmed by their inherited genetic information, modified by learned information. So obviously, information was very important to Dr. Odum. Okay, I had this little history. I'm going to zip through it. The point was to identify some intellectual themes that reappear in Odum's work, but I won't say much about it at all. Norbert Weiner and cybernetics at the early years. The point of, Odum got his PhD in 1950, if you don't know, from Yale. And so this is the period of, or immediately after, the appearance of people like Weiner and his cybernetics, Claude Shannon in information theory. More important to other system scientists, I would say, Hutchinson, the father of modern ecology, was Dr. Odum's mentor at Yale. The Macy conferences for systems theory, if you know about them. There's Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, a couple anthropologists actually at the conference, Norbert Weiner. And Hutchinson actually went at least 1 year. And then Lotka and physical biology. The point of that history was that these years of cybernetics, information theory, the emergence of ecology, especially under Hutchinson, and systems theory were very influential in many fields, including psychology, neurobiology, anthropology, philosophy, linguistics, and the early robotics. It sounds like Weiner was more like a rock star, very popular public intellectual, maybe like Einstein. To all of that, Odum injected the physical biology of Lotka with his focus on energy and maximum power. From what I've read, it seems like Odum's energy approach was not universally welcome. Here's a quote from Kenneth Boulding in 1977. Social systems cannot be reduced to physical descriptions, whether in terms of energy, entropy, and any other kind of physical or engineering efficiency concepts. The obvious answer to that is, of course, it should be tried. I mean, the nature of the universe is energy, matter, and information. Okay, Odum's information. So what was information to Dr. Odum? Whenever Odum wrote about information, it was always after a thorough treatment of energy systems, even when it was a journal article about information. That's because for Odum, information is an essential component of every system of energy transformation hierarchies that self-organize according to the principle of maximum empower. When I started my dive, I spent a lot of time collecting many of Odum's descriptive terms. Here you see some of them. After review, it seemed to me that Odum has a two-part understanding of information that I call what it is and what it does. The two parts are linked, but they are often discussed in different contexts and studied with different methods. So what it is, I have right there, and what it does. So what it is. So I will step through these two categories. In many cases, Odum gives a definition for information like this one. For our purpose, information is defined as the units, connections, and configurations of a system. The information may be in an operating system or extracted and stored in compact form in plan or code. So what information is the units, connections, and configurations. Information is in configurations. It can be extracted into a plan. It can be miniaturized. It is carried on some material or energetic carrier. It's easy to copy. It can be shared. It has a territory of influence. The original and last copy have great value. Information can be lost as the carriers disperse. Information needs to be maintained. It's typically maintained in the information cycle. Information has a quadratic resource requirement, and information should be studied with Emergy. Information theory is insufficient. I will walk through these one at a time. So the first one, information is in configurations. Information is in the configuration of a successfully functioning system. Here it is in the configuration of an ecosystem, Odum's favorite example, and here in the configuration of a radio, Odum's other favorite example. For an engineer, a radio is a collection of parts and wires which constitute a system, but only if they are assembled correctly. And I mean it. This radio example appears many times throughout Dr. Odum's writings. Next, information can be extracted in a plan and miniaturized. Obviously, a plan for a radio is the design specification stored in paper form. A plan for an ecosystem is less obvious. Odum says it could be a species list and actual organisms that could be recombined if desired and allowed to self-organize. The extracted and stored plan of the individual organisms is more obvious. It is the DNA in seed or egg. The extracted and stored plan of an economy is in the set of occupations and the educated memories of workers. We see the principle of extraction in this early diagram in the Crawford lecture. Information is extracted and stored as the assets are constructed. That assets flow, you can see in the curve. I should get my little pointer going. So as the assets are constructed, the information is extracted and stored. Extraction will appear again in other diagrams, especially in the information cycle. Direct support for this fundamental principle comes from anthropology. Henrik says, in our history of cumulative culture, cultural artifacts and technologies come first, followed by the extraction of information into explanations that are useful for transmission and therefore wider cultural sharing. Okay, next on my list, information is always carried. Information does not exist in abstraction. It is always carried on some material or energy carrier. Here are some carriers: paper and ink, computer disks, human minds, geologic materials, DNA, electromagnetic waves, sound wave, always some concentration that will naturally depreciate. Next, information is easy to copy. Information that is extracted, miniaturized, and carried is easy to copy. This is one of the defining features of information for Odum. It takes less energy to copy than to generate anew. Next, information can be shared. By sharing, Odum is referring to a spatial aspect of information, which is that information on a physical carrier is always located somewhere in space and time. Copying information makes it possible to spread that information widely in space, and that's called sharing. This is an invaluable quality of information because a well-adapted configuration can be duplicated to cover a large territory, and it is thus more difficult for that configuration to be lost. Next, shared information has a wide territory. Information that is maintained in many copies over a large territory has wider influence and control. Next, the original information has great value. some more than others. That's me working on one of my papers at a 7-Eleven somewhere here in Taiwan. But the original and last copies of information represent all the energy of the extraction and production process in creating the original, or in the case of the last copy, all the energy that would be required to reproduce a new original if it were lost. Next, information can be lost. Information is invaluable to a system, as just stated. It is the product of self-organization for maximum empower and preserves time-tested design for storage and energy pathways. Because information is carried on energy or material carriers, however, it is subject to second law depreciation and loss. As any energy concentration, it is continuously lost and can be maintained only by additional work. To the adage, energy flows and material cycle could be added and information cycles, but only until its carrier depreciates, at which time it flows or is lost. But in a second, I will address the maintenance of information and thus why it is rarely lost if it continues to be functional in the world. Next, information has a quadratic resource requirement. As the units, connections, and configurations of information continue to grow, more and more energy is required for their maintenance. They have a quadratic resource requirement. That is because the connections between units grow quadratically as units are added. All connections may not exist in a real system, but energy is required to maintain both the presence or absence, and units require insulation from each other. Therefore, in systems diagramming and modeling, either the energy input is amplified by a quadratic feedback, if you recognize that feedback right there with the two arrows, that's a quadratic feedback, or the storage is drained by a quadratic dispersal flow. Either way, more energy is pulled into its maintenance. It takes more energy to maintain diversity or information. Odum applies this reasoning to diverse species and ecosystems, to computer networks, and to occupational specialists in human economies. Next, the maintenance of information. As stated, information is invaluable to a system. If information is lost or damaged, it can no longer function to repair or reproduce or share the system design. Normally, any storage in a systems diagram has a drain for dispersal or depreciation, and then inflow to produce and maintain the storage. This is a typical storage, but a storage of information is different. The extracted and miniaturized plan of a system is fragile. If errors develop in the plan, future copying of that information will also have errors and fail to reproduce the system, which is a great loss of the time and energy that was required for the system to self-organize. Next, the information cycle. The convention of a single storage to represent information is used for system simulations, but for theorizing the maintenance of information, Odum gradually developed a more complex model, the information cycle. Here, a successful object is selected from the world, its information is extracted, many copies are made in new objects, which are then dispersed again to the world. This is Odum's second diagram of the information cycle. You saw this last week. These are all of his information cycle drawings, and I'll come back to that. Next, information should be measured with Emergy. From his early writings about information onward, so back to 1971 at least, Odum was critical of the popular information theory conceptualization of information. His objections were not trivial, but rather went to the central components of his energy theorizing, specifically maximum M power and the hierarchy principle, and the concept of energy quality. His first objection was the popular log of possibilities measurement did not distinguish useful complexity from useless. Complexity that was the product of energy self-organization could be assigned the same measure in bits as a random collection of parts. Second, information measurements do not take account of the energy hierarchy. Configurations of units in real systems at the small scale or the large can be represented mathematically with the same bits per individual. Configurations at the large scale may appear to be simple with few objects and energy outputs that are small. Measured with information bits in a diversity index, the system at that scale may even be judged to be less complex than a system at a smaller scale. What's missing is the deep memory of the many transformations at smaller scales that made possible the system at the larger scale of the energy transformation hierarchy. That memory can be supplied by the energy memory, or the Emergy. And so for both of those objections, Odum argued that Emergy per bit values should be used for these types of comparisons because Emergy represents the totality of the work of systems. Okay, summary, what information is. I've produced two graphics and a table to attempt to summarize these topics. I'll walk through the layout of this first graphic. Information is in functional systems, in operating systems, in a set of species in the ecosystem, if they have self-organized with life for maximum M power. Information is the units, connections, and configurations. These are all similar definitions here below that I've found in different places in his writing. And so next, it is the parts and relationships. It is the components and operations. It is the components, configurations, and program sequences. But really, most often, units, connections, and configurations is the definition that you find. The information can be extracted from the system and miniaturized into a plan, code, or design of some kind. That is carried in seeds, memory, paper, genes, electromagnetic wave, etc. So with that same design, here we see a social group, a mating pair. The information that's extracted is the DNA. A village or a town, information can be extracted from that structure. A city. Each of these is a configuration of units and connections for which information may be extracted. It may be extracted into a novel, a scientific report, DNA for reproduction, a finance report, etc. Last week, it was extracted into highway construction specs, highway maps, and scientific abstracts, articles, and books. Okay, a second graphic that I made, I'll walk through this too. This diagram depicts the relationship between people, the world, and the cultural information that they create. People are provisioned by an economy. Cultural information is extracted by people from the material economy and ecology. It is then shared to control people and nature. That's control feedback there from cultural information back to people and nature. Odum said, after information is copied, it may be shared. The same information then has a larger territory, a greater area of influence, and a slower depreciation rate. Considerable additional work must be done to develop the shared status. Extracted and shared information creates each of these hierarchies: the cultural information hierarchy, the human hierarchy, the economic or manufacturing hierarchy, you'll see, and the ecosystem hierarchies. These will be discussed below. And you'll see both of these diagrams again. And then here is my summarizing table. The first column is Odum's units, connections, and configurations. And then placed into more common terms and linked to his systems diagramming objects. This parallel of the information definition to Odum's system objects is my interpretation that I only recently noticed. Units are storages, connections are flows, and configurations are systems. Therefore, any systems diagram depicts Odum's information categories of units, connections, and configurations. I'm not saying that every system diagram is describing an information system. In fact, most depict material processes and transformations of some kind. But I am saying that systems diagramming is an informational process, and therefore for Odum naturally divides into units, connections, and configurations. Common examples of units are objects, entities, substances, or parts. Common examples of connections can be a mathematical function for a flow, as is typical for systems modeling. Or it can be something more abstract, like a causal model from philosophy. Or it can be spatial relations, etc. And last, for configurations, we might typically think of ecosystems or gene sequences, but we can also use the term to represent configurations of meaningful units that together produce a model of the world, or from anthropology, an ideology, or a schema, or a cultural model, or a discursive formation, if you're a fan of Foucault, or others. So what I'm saying is that, surprisingly perhaps, I think there's a direct link between his most common definition of information and his energy systems diagramming language. Oops. And thus, an energy systems program is one way to represent the extracted information of the system. The computer program is the extracted information, complete with storages and a network of flows in a system. I never saw Dr. Odum connect his systems diagramming to his definition of information, but it seems logical to me anyway. Okay, now to the second half of Odum's understanding of information, what information does. In two similar quotations, Odum said, information is useful if it feeds back as an amplifier, contributing to maximum empower. Or, information is useful if it can make a system operate. With the cybernetics revolution, the discovery and demonstration of the function of information became a focus of intense interest in many fields. Again, engineering, psychology, neurobiology, anthropology, others. Information in the conveyance of negative feedback was the instrument for creating stability, balance, learning, homeostasis. Positive feedback, on the other hand, was perceived by at least some, like Weiner, as dangerous to such living and mechanical systems, leading to instability or accident. Many scientists and others saw great promise in the concept of negative feedback. Forrester was one of them, And not surprising, his systems dynamics modeling software and diagramming language emphasizes feedback, negative and also positive. Negative feedback was seen as key to neuron physiology and related learning behavior. This was the era of behavioral psychology with negative and positive reinforcement. Odum offered a strikingly different view of negative feedback. It is in fact difficult to find negative feedback in one of his systems diagrams or simulations, although it's present in nearly every diagram wherever there is a concentration of energy or materials. Negative feedback is the dispersing outflow from a storage or concentration. Negative feedback is a drain that slows or halts that growth by draining the storage at some rate, eventually balancing inflow with outflow. Thus, as negative feedback in other systems diagrams, in other diagramming systems, it achieves stability or balance. The reason for this contrasting view of negative feedback is fundamental to Odum's theoretical understanding of energy systems. He gave negative feedback a much more marginal role within energy systems that are expected to capture energy and self-organize when energy sources are available. In energy systems models, energy is a forcing function that enters or creates a system. Within that system, positive feedback is an energy flow that interacts with energy inputs, capturing, directing, and amplifying their flow. Energy systems are created, animated, driven by concentrations of energy, which is a directional force from concentration to dissipation, per the second law. Therefore, the systems modeling is centered on energy sources, storages, and flows, and feedback control from storages is typically positive, amplifying feedback. Negative feedback, where it appears in his modeling, is primarily to limit or stabilize growth. The field of ecosystem science, in contrast, recognized the benefit of both negative and positive feedback. In succession, fast growth from positive feedback is essential to pioneer species and so on. Self-organization does not require information. As I said last week, information as positive feedback, however, can greatly benefit the process of self-organization in this role of energy capture for maximum empower. Furthermore, information also serves to maintain self-organized structure, as I've said, to ride out the fluctuations of energy sources and to transmit that structure into the future. These are the functions of information to systems. It is what information does. Okay, that was kind of introduction. Here's my list for what information does. In general, information provides persistence and feedback for control. My first item here, computer modeling of systems. I'll explain that in a second. The persistence of systems. So information provides the persistence of systems during energy source fluctuations. It provides the control of systems. Diversity provides control. Culture provides control. Control by shared programs of learned behavior. Information feeds back from centers, and it's produced in the pulsing paradigm. I list first, though, computer modeling of systems, not really a feature of information, but essential to understanding the role of information for Dr. Odum. It was stated above that Odum pursued the two facets of his understanding of information in different contexts and with different methods. Odum explored the role or function of information primarily with his energy systems modeling. It was his pioneering computer modeling of ecosystems and other systems that allowed him to experiment with his energy systems theories and so on. J. Forrester at MIT and Odum the first modelers, foresters, was industrial system, Odum ecological systems. You can see two different diagramming languages there. In the 70s, Odum directed a number of PhD and master students to produce complex simulations. Here's Boynton's simulation of an oyster industry included in systems ecology. In systems ecology, Odum provided some direct comparisons with systems dynamics modeling, including one of the world model by Forrester and Meadows. Very famous. Okay, now the second element, or really the first element of what information does, the persistence of systems. Self-organized systems without information build structures that feed back to amplify their intake of energy. In a typhoon or thunderstorm, that structure is the emergent shape and dynamics. When evening comes or when the typhoon moves onshore, the structure loses its energy source and collapses. But it's a different story when there is information. Here's a comparison of that shows living systems on the right and non-living on the left. Again, I'm skipping chunks of text. Okay. Next, in what information does is the control of systems. If you recall from my opening quote for Odum, Earth processes, ecosystems, and human systems are controlled by the information of genetics and culture. And another great quote, I have to read this one. The main essence of life has a large global territory. It was evolved as part of Earth crust development, along with the development of the continents. The memory of what worked was selected by the interactions of ecosystems and geologic operations on the landscape. The programs for Earth operation are in the genetics of life. Genetic inheritance is a geologic property. The main part of genetic information of life is in common, shared by millions of organisms, took billions of years to develop, and has a large global territory. When Odum says the memory of what worked and the programs for Earth operation, he's referring to information that has controlled the biosphere system since the emergence of life, the core of which is held by all organisms in common. This is the persistence of systems provided by information. Next, diversity provides control. While the majority of genetic information of life is held in common, there is also incredible diversity, of course, among organisms. It is widely held that diversity is a benefit for ecosystems, providing for stability, a division of labor, and increased gross production. However, the topic is more nuanced. In some situations, when environmental conditions are extreme, or if there are excessive inflows of available resources, light, or nutrients, simple ecosystems generate greater metabolism with less diversity. Some specific types of positive feedback control from diversity include protection against epidemics, protection for watersheds and their discharges in tropical rainforest, and the ability to generate products and mineralize wastes. In simulation, diversity and cultural information is typically shown as a storage. That storage provides feedback control. As mentioned above, it may be used to represent the quadratic resource requirement for diversity, and thus to support Odum's contention that there are limits to the total of cultural information and biodiversity, or the combination of those types of information, those two. In other simulations, the diversity of information storage provides a different type of control as the Frenzer in a pulsing pair. It should be recalled that in Emergy accounting, the large storages of diversity or cultural information are by convention not included as inputs to processes, as explained last time in Emergy evaluations. I'm just adding that. The control is extremely important in simulations, but in Emergy evaluations, it's not added back. Okay, that was diversity provides control. Now culture provides control. For Odum, culture is learned information that provides feedback control. It maximizes power by feeding back actions that capture additional energy sources, and it preserves system designs. For example, according to Odum and systems ecology, culture feeds back system stabilizing, reinforcing positive feedback with religion, with money, government, family, feeding, and housing. I include some of my own terms here to go along with those. These terms actually fit a little better in my hierarchy of cultural information you will see. In Environment, Power, and Society, Odum gives a number of examples of cultural control in energetic organization of society. A law is a control pathway, often turning actions on or off, as here in a switch object. Or here, money is a loop reward selector, he called it, that provides immediate reward to people for their services provided to a process. In other words, services go to the left, money goes to the right. Here are 3 diagrams of control loops for different forms of government: simple, totalitarian, and democratic. And another example, Imperial Rome. I won't discuss that. Oh, I was going to, but I won't. Finally, Odum presents a chapter on the role of religion in social control. Again, I had more to say, but I won't bother. Next on my list, information provides control by shared programs of learned behavior. In Environment, Power, and Society, Odum rephrased his standard definition of units, connections, and configurations. The new wording is components, configurations, and program sequences of functional systems. In the way that the information configuration of a radio operates the radio to its intended function, so too do the shared programs of a religion operate to transform individual behavior into group behavior to feed back some cooperative action control. Odum said, each person has a set of program functions which they contribute to society by plugging in. Next on the list, information feeds back from centers. In each step of the energy hierarchy, energy is transformed into new products. Much of the energy for production is dissipated, and small amounts feed back reinforcement to the scales below. Therefore, in order to supply sufficient energy for next steps in the chain, energy production is converged in space. For human society, convergence is into towns and further into cities and megacities. Products with the least energy are shared cultural information that is converged to centers from which information then feeds back as control. Odum said, the flows of information carry the most embodied energy, or we call Emergy now, and also have the greatest amplifier and control effects per calorie. They are the feedbacks of highly embodied energy that provide systems with specialized services, feeding back positive actions that repay their webs for the energy dispersed in the development of the information, in the development of themselves. In a sense, the system is reinforced by information production that follows from long chains of convergence of energy and materials. The information then repays their webs, as Odum said, with services for the energy that created it. Or here, information repays their webs for the energy that created it. Systems prevail that form hierarchical centers spatially culminating in information production. Last on my list, information is produced in the pulsing paradigm. And I won't say, oh, I have this more. Odum felt that the current information era is the result of the pulsed consumption of economic assets, which were themselves made possible by the pulsed consumption of environmental resources, including fossil fuels, since the Industrial Revolution. Moving up the energy transformation hierarchy, production converges into cities where great storages of economic and fuel assets are being consumed in the most recent pulse of information production. And if anyone noticed, my parallel cycles diagram from last week is a pulsing model with an accumulator and a frenzer labeled at the bottom there. Okay. Information must be maintained. With this recognition of the significance of information for systems, it becomes clear why information must be maintained. Information provides for system control and for the persistence of systems through time. But the carriers of information are fragile and subject to second law, depreciation and loss. Yeah, again, you saw that last week. Odum described the information cycle in this way. To keep information functional, a system is required to make more copies than needed. Test each functionally, discard the erroneous and ill-adapted copies, and use the ones that make the system perform best for future copying. There was much to say about this last week, so I will not elaborate. Okay, building on Odum's information cycle. With a hopefully clear appreciation now of Odum's understanding of information, what it is and what it does, it's time to broaden the discussion. When I say building on Odum's information cycle, I'm referring to my proposal to add to Odum's information cycle model by expanding it to a nested hierarchy of cultural information forms. I've done this some time ago, originally in a 2014 paper. My information forms all differ in the total emergy of inputs, their cycle time or speed of production, the durability of their carriers, the accuracy of their transmission, the territory of their sharing of or control, which increase together from one scale to the next. In this hierarchy model, the attempt is made to represent the increasing intensity of these qualities with expanding cycles. To relate this to last week's talk, one outcome of identifying these distinct scales is to create targets for Emergy analyses. Culture is a huge topic. This model maybe helps to answer the question of what is to be evaluated when you are interested more generally in culture. And you saw that last week with my evaluation of just one of those scales there, academic research. Using the same extract model from above, how can some of these communication objects be depicted? I'll step through a few. A novel is extracted by an author from the real or imagined units, connections, and configurations of a village of people and social interactions that make up a functional system. The novel, when published, is carried in paper form. A corporate law is extracted from economic activity that has been following self-organized social norms that are now codified into a law and stored on paper. Empirical data is extracted from the world in laboratory experiments. A news story about a train wreck is extracted from an event. A set of species, a list of species on paper, is extracted from a self-organized forest ecosystem. It may later be used by a botanist to initiate the reconstruction of an ecosystem through self-organization. A pop song can be banged out in a studio and then extracted into miniaturized form in song or in written lyrics. A fascinating Facebook post is imagined in the coffee shop and then extracted into digital form. In his 1977 Zygon article, an academic journal of religion and science, Zygon, Odum diagrammed his view of the function of science in society, and Dr. Brown used this same diagram in his paper about Odum's diagramming. For Odum, science generates simplified overview models of the world that create for us understanding of basic functional processes. In his term, one role of humanity on Earth is to help the system see itself. Notice in the little TV set right there, there appears to be the result of one of his simulations, a curve. Feeding back to help people see themselves and the world, perhaps. In the systems diagram above, this is the overview ideas and models. Feeding back a simplified view of the world to help people control. Elsewhere in the paper, in discussion of the role of religion in society, what religious information does, he emphasized its effect on individuals. A basic morality program capable of powerful feedback control if learned in childhood. That is religion. The lessons of the Zygon paper for the current discussion are significant. Cultural information, whether science or religion, presents some essence of the world to us. The creators of this cultural information extract some properties or behaviors or scenarios of the world, real or imagined, and present them to us with an intention of guiding or controlling our behavior. Seen in this way, it should be obvious that all cultural information forms in my nested hierarchy do essentially the same thing. They present some view of the world with the intention of guiding our behavior. It's interesting maybe that my diagram was unintentionally nearly identical to Odum's. There's landscape, there's humanity, and there's ideas. Note that Odum's overview ideas models are equivalent to the cultural information in my diagram. When expanded, my diagram shows the cultural information to be the hierarchy of cultural information forms. Again, the point is that all cultural information forms do essentially the same thing, feeding back images of the world with the intention of guiding behavior. This raises the issue of information function. Popular culture is regularly seen by commentators on both the left and the right as frivolous, wasteful, immoral, etc. Odum sometimes participated in this criticism. Celebrity worship is singled out as wasteful by Dr. Odum, together with the huge energies flow that goes into sports, music, movies, politics, journalistic entertainment, and especially advertising. However, Odum believed, and so do I, that function is not always obvious and not always at the scale of the people and behaviors involved. He said, whenever something destructive becomes important, one needs to look to the larger scale to see what it may be reinforcing. From the perspective developed here, in my opinion, the other cultural information forms besides science must also contribute to maximum empower, or they would not persist for long. In my view, popular movies, music, sports, popular media, etc., when they reinforce competitive and consumer behavior in capitalist societies, may all be contributing to maximum empower in the present fossil fuel age, or at least they were some years ago. Following Odum's recommendation in the quotation, the functional roles of each of those cultural forms should be carefully considered. The practice of searching for functional explanations of unusual culture behavior has a long tradition in the social sciences, perhaps most vigorously pursued by one of my professors, the late anthropologist Marvin Harris. Does this mean that science then has no special place among all the communication forms in the production of ideas? In my nested hierarchy diagram, it can be seen that science is one of the rightmost information forms. This means that it requires large Emergy inputs, is slow and deliberate to produce, is carried on very durable carriers, fidelity of transmission is high, due in part to the special training required for communication, and the territory of sharing is nearly worldwide due to libraries and the internet. But notice that science competes with other rightmost communication forms, sacred texts, military tactics, technologies, legal codes, and perhaps others for greatest impact and control. The arrangement of these rightmost forms is my working hypothesis. I can make arguments for and against this ordering related to territory, durability, cycle time, etc. But evaluations need to be done. Odum typically placed government furthest to the right in his diagrams, as I have done here. Religion, too, is always a powerful control from the right for Odum. The point is that science is only one of the most influential information forms and obviously does not always control our systems. Think of COVID-19. If cultural information is a hierarchy of diverse forms, each with different territories and time constants, this observation becomes understandable. When societies change rapidly, pulsing in either growth or collapse, some information flows will change rapidly, while others will lag behind. We recognize this when perhaps economic forms or sacred scripts seem to have very long durations, even riding over fluctuations of social upheavals, revolutions, or environmental collapse. Those patterns of economy or those religious systems survive, pass through those big upheavals that cause a lot of other information forms to disappear. And now for the section that I call building with energy systems theories. Drink. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maximum empower and the hierarchy principle can guide new research into information. Maximum power and the hierarchy principle. Odum's hierarchy principle is descriptive of the world. Energy transformation processes are joined in characteristic fashion in which outputs from one in a series or web contributes and converges energy to produce an even smaller output at the next higher level, from which feedback control returns and reinforces the prior. An example is the ecosystem food web or trophic hierarchy. The hierarchy principle is in the first instance descriptive because it is in fact dependent on the maximum empower principle for its causal mechanism. Odum says, ecosystems, earth systems, astronomical systems, and possibly all systems are organized in hierarchies because this design maximizes useful energy processing, i.e., a hierarchy is the result of maximum empower. Energy hierarchies are typically represented by Odum with systems diagramming and with graphs of energy spectra. Oops. All right. Oh, and by the way, when you see this diagramming convention of mine, what you are seeing is a combination of energy spectra diagram, that's this one here, and energy systems diagrams. Maybe you see the arrows going this way and feeding back. So my convention there is really a combination of these two, you could say. I didn't do it on purpose, but it works out that way. In this diagram, figure A illustrates that even in equilibrium or with weak source energy, as in fluids with weak turbulence, there is a hierarchy of energy per unit, in figure B down here, with a strong energy source, the continuous energy distribution breaks up into autocatalytic units. So continuous, and then when you add more energy, a strong source, it breaks up into units that are autocatalytic. Odum said, each autocatalytic unit occupies a zone of the energy spectrum on its scale. Other units form in adjacent scales. You'll see that again in a minute. In Odum's account, at equilibrium, energy moving upscale to the right equals that dispersing downscale to the left. Even at equilibrium, self-organization generates an energy hierarchy. No assumptions of randomness are needed. According to Odum, the idea that randomness was inherent in molecular population was encouraged by the fact that a hierarchical distribution of molecular velocities is Gaussian. Oops. Because the kinetic energy of molecules is the square of their velocity, a bell-shaped velocity distribution has an exponential distribution of kinetic energy. Now add a small inflow of available energy, more of the energy moves to the right, and the system is now energetically open, but without much change in the energy hierarchy. Energy open, energy goes in and dissipates out. It's an open system. Jeez. Sorry. The continuous energy distribution breaks up into autocatalytic units. So weak source and strong source. This figure has valuable implications for my nested hierarchy of communication forms, which you have now seen a couple times. The suggestion is that early human societies with low energy inputs might have supported only slightly differentiated communication forms, perhaps gesture, regular speech. Oops, it's bouncing. Perhaps gesture, regular speech, storytelling, and simple rituals for healing, hunting, etc. As human societies captured more energy, the communication distribution further broke up, adding new communication forms and differentiation between them, each with increased durability, accuracy, cycle time, and territory. In a nutshell, this is the theory. Look at some examples. In societies with greater empower, flows of energy from technologies like irrigation agriculture, plows and traction animals, metal tools and weapons, sailboats, etc., the hierarchy of communication forms would be different, probably longer, with more distinct scales. Here's the conversation scale, a trade scale, a ritual scale, a wedding feast, a theater scale, and legal codes and state ritual scale. In even larger state societies in the past, the hierarchy should extend further with more communication forms. Contemporary societies have even more. Here in a spectral diagram, in a spectral graph, and an energy transformation chain. I will question below whether these diverse forms belong in one hierarchy or more. And in my combined format here, this is my older diagram of those same scales. Universal materials distribution, the sixth energy law, and information. And I also call this the first corollary of the fifth law. Odum applied the principle of the energy transformation hierarchy to additional realms of materials and money. I'll return shortly to money. Odum proposed a sixth energy law of material processing that relates material distributions to the energy hierarchy. I'll explain this diagram as I go along. Here are two versions of the sixth law, or the first corollary of the fifth law, from two publications. Materials of biogeochemical cycles are hierarchically organized because of the necessary coupling of matter to the universal energy transformation hierarchy. And materials are coupled to the energy transformation hierarchy and circulate towards centers of hierarchical concentration, recycling to dispersed background concentrations. Minerals are found in the earth in a range of concentrations. At most times widely dispersed, they are sometimes concentrated, as when metals are found in ore bodies. At each step in the energy transformation hierarchy, most of the energy is depreciated. Therefore, did it bounce? Nope. Sorry. Most of the energy is depreciated. It bounced. Therefore, for the next step, there will be less energy to transform or concentrate materials further. And therefore, most of the material will also be dispersed. And a smaller portion will be further concentrated and out the hierarchy. An example of this is the Earth systems hierarchy, in which mountains are centers of energy convergence, while simultaneously one of the locations of rare metal ores. Materials are also concentrated by the energy of the water cycles, as water carries sediments and converges them as deposits in wetlands or river deltas. As energy is used up in each step of the energy transformation hierarchy, there is less available energy to do further concentrating of materials. There's an inverse relationship between the quantity of materials concentrated and the degree of concentration, as shown here. The same relationship between quantity and concentration is also shown in this graph, a commonly observed graph of the distribution of any single mineral, with dispersal primarily in low concentrations and few deposits, primarily in low concentration and few deposits of high concentration. Primarily, sorry. So most of it over here in low concentration, small amounts over here in high concentration. The distribution is the direct result of the concentrating action of the energy hierarchy. Figure B here of that same diagram locates three different materials. Okay, these are three different materials. Because there is a distribution or range of concentrations for each material, there is not simply a single point on this curve, a single Emergy per mass or transformity for each mineral. Instead, there is a range or zone of Emergy per mass values. for each material, depicted by the small distribution icon below each circle. Here, a distribution icon. The circles are labeled material cycles because they refer to the material cycling. Refer to the material cycling of the early energy transformation diagram that showed materials cycling back. That's why it's drawn as a circle like that. Finally, on this more complete graph, let me see if it bounced. Nope. Oh yeah. Notice again that each material is located by energy per mass or transformity somewhere along the universal energy transformation spectrum here, the curve on the graph. Scarce minerals on the right require more transformations and thus more energy per gram for their formation. Because they are scarce, they are lower on the y-axis of total energy flow. Finally, on this more complete graph of materials on the energy transformation spectrum, we can see the many materials of the Earth with atmosphere and river water on the left of the diagram and gold on the right. Remember that each point on the graph is actually a hierarchical material distribution. So the sixth law, or first corollary of the fifth law, and the related graphs have now been explained in detail because they will be applied below. Before that, Odum's related seventh law, the second corollary of the fifth law, will be introduced together with some propositions for building with the seventh law. So in 2001, Odum continued to build with the hierarchy principle when he proposed a seventh law, the hierarchy of money. Again, I'm also calling it the second corollary. For Odum, money is information with a single specific role within national and global systems. Money circulates among humans and their economic activities. Money is a type of information that flows as a countercurrent in exchange for real goods and services. Money is only paid to people and never to the environment for its work. In his 2001 paper, Odum focused on the distribution of money in economies and its relationship to the energy transformation hierarchy. His explanation for the distribution, concentration, and convergence of money has direct comparison to the principle of materials hierarchy, the sixth law that we just saw. In this case, with each step, it is money, not materials, that is being concentrated to the right. Once it becomes stable, no new money is added to the system, and the shown amount of money is cycled at each step. What Odum did not explain with this model is the cultural mechanism for the production of money concentrations. Money is a form of information, and there should thus be information cycles for the production of money in concentrations. In my 2016 paper, that mechanism is described. A proposed hierarchy of money concentrations, I call pools of money, is in this figure from that paper. And here was my functional model of the parts of the financial industry and the production of money concentrations from that paper. In my paper, I used the information cycle to define the steps in production of money concentration at each scale of size. Successful loan types, currencies, securities, etc., are selected by financial institutions and the market to be cycled again. Successful designs are extracted in financial companies for the production of car and student loans, mortgages, derivatives, IPOs, etc. Copies are made and they are dispersed to the world via markets. Odum did not emphasize the status of money as concentrations, and I do not want to distract from recounting the seventh law, but I wanted to briefly insert my paper at this point. In systems modeling, it is typically energy, storage, and sources that drive simulations. What I am suggesting is that the production of money concentrations or storages will also influence simulations, not as driving forces, but as delays that can affect production processes, especially when moving to the right in the economy. Large money concentrations are required to initiate production. It is time perhaps to consider my hierarchy of cultural information forms as yet another corollary of the hierarchy principle. Again, a point of this model is to provide a way to conceive of culture and then evaluate it. To mimic the sixth law, I said cultural information is hierarchically organized because of the necessary coupling of matter energy in information carriers to the universal energy transformation hierarchy. And here's the sixth law. Materials of biogeochemical cycles are hierarchically organized because of the necessary coupling of matter to the universal energy transformation hierarchy. Here again is my hierarchy of communication forms of cultural information, the older version. As stated several times now, as information is found in increasing scales of information hierarchy, there is an increase in those features. An example would be the convergence of legal codes or money concentration into centers of government or finance within cities. This is similar to moving to the right in the material hierarchy, where materials are concentrated with energy into spatial centers like volcanoes or wetlands. Energy per concentration increases, energy per mass, and turnover times of concentrations increase. It is proposed here that each information scale, as each material, is found in a similarly skewed distribution of concentrations. They are therefore depicted with the distribution symbol below the cycle shape as seen before to represent similar zones of transformity. Where this model differs from the graph of materials is that the steps in the distributions of cultural information are each recognizable and labeled subforms of cultural information. You can see in this slide. Here, bars in the distribution refer to subforms for each information scale. For example, the social media scale is more accurately a skewed distribution of social media subforms, a distribution of many, many tweets located on the left, fewer status updates in the middle, and fewer still blogs produced on the right. Or last week, my hierarchy of academic research scale of abstracts, articles, and books. Here's another way that Odum depicted the sixth law material cycle: converging, dispersal. And here's my diagram of the spatial convergence of cultural information. Notice that this is the convergence between scales, i.e. conversation converging to social media, to TV news, and last to academic research. So jumping over scales. Or here is a similar diagram of convergence within scale. Here, the TV scale convergence is from TV news to TV serials to TV movies. Here, therefore, are a few ideas on the right. Here, therefore, are fewer ideas on the right because there is less energy to concentrate ideas and to maintain material carriers. And one more, concentrating materials in the materials hierarchy. You saw this. And here, concentrating cultural information. On the left is a high count of communication events, ideas transmitted, and total carrier materials flow. On the left, did I say? On the right, there are fewer ideas, and the ideas and their carriers are concentrated in space. The energy per ideas is higher, and the percent transmission per event is high fidelity of transmission. In this diagram from last week, the hierarchy of all this cultural information is here, furthest to the right. Odum said that manufacturing is essentially copying information and coupling information to hardware. It is proposed here that as products of both material and information, manufactured goods are produced in a hierarchy of energy transformation scales, a fourth corollary of the fifth law. Here's my hierarchy of the manufactured objects. You got a glimpse of it last week. As other hierarchies discussed above, objects on the left are produced in greater number, objects on the right in greater size and longer production time. For both the material objects and the information that controls their production, there can be seen the now familiar increase in duration, in production time, in durability of carrier object. Oops, I'm ahead. Accuracy or precision of production, territory of influence, and convergence to spatial centers. In this diagram, manufactured products are grouped under the aggregate headings used by economists: non-durable goods and durable goods. And to that, I added my capital goods on the right that are sometimes considered infrastructure, like highways or underwater communication cables, or otherwise classified, but rarely referred to as goods, objects like the CERN super collider or a skyscraper. But from the perspective here, they are all products of an energy transformation process, and hence can be joined together as manufactured goods, albeit of a super scale of size and required inputs. Like a novel, a manufactured object is a configuration of parts. The essence of that object can be extracted from the object and stored in miniaturized form in design documents. Think of Odum's radio example. In both cases, the information of the object may be selected and reproduced, maintained with information cycles. For the novel, in new editions; for the manufactured object, in new production, with perhaps improvements introduced. In this diagram from last week, the hierarchy of manufactured objects is here, labeled economic production. Or you could think of it like that. Here's a typical depiction of manufacturing by Odum, very understated in comparison perhaps to my diagram. Here's a question. For many minerals today, humans control the final convergence or concentration of the materials in their biogeochemical cycles. Humans control the final convergence or concentration. For example, fossil fuels, limestone, dolomite, iron ore, lead, phosphate rock, copper, gypsum, zinc, cadmium. These are the 10 most important minerals plus fossil fuel for the US economy today. I got that from DeVilbiss and Brown, 2015, that list. Now compare that for all manufactured objects. Humans control the entire production process, not the end, but the entire production process, which typically includes many different materials, followed by dispersal as waste products. So my question, is the hierarchy of manufactured objects a distinct hierarchy, the fourth corollary, etc., or is it simply the apex of the global materials cycles? That's one for you, longtime Emergy people. My information hierarchy, okay, so my last section of the talk, my information hierarchy has changed some since it was first proposed. For this last section of the presentation, I'll briefly describe those changes. And so once more, as related to Emergy analyses of information in last week's talk, my newer effort to improve my hierarchy of cultural information is intended to better answer the question of what to evaluate when you are interested in culture. There have been some scales added and some jostling of position. Other things seem to be missing. More recently, I've come to realize that some of the communication forms seem to be fundamentally different in their code and carriers or modality, language versus music versus visual performance, and perhaps deserve hierarchies of their own. Here in this older diagram, there are many scales that rely on human language, but what are these? Finance software. And what is their code? And where are other types of human communication like music, dance, and sport? And how did I leave out world religion? Yeah, hard to believe. One of Dr. Odum's famous types of communication. This table is the result of my splitting and reconceiving of the original hierarchy. For regular human communication, I now distinguish linguistic verbal communication from musical rhythmic communication, pop songs and operas, etc., which are distinguished from bodily kinesthetic communication in sports, ballet, diving, ritual dance. This may be odd terminology, is not mine. It comes from the study of human intelligence by Gardner. I like the groupings because Gardner emphasized their distinct emergence in evolutionary history. Music and dance have a long evolutionary history and appear to tap into some innate human abilities, which distinguish them from communication in language. Other distinctions here I'll explain below. And so here for my new hierarchy of the first row, linguistic verbal communication, are added scales of sacred texts, military tactics and technologies, and movies. Obviously, sacred texts belonged in the original model. Odum recognized religion, I should have. Sacred texts have long turnover times, great territories, etc. In my original model, I imagined that military tactics and technologies would be part of scientific knowledge. However, they have a cultural evolutionary history that precedes science, and they too have nearly worldwide territory. So I pulled that out by itself. In my original scheme, I lumped movies and television, but movies are slower to make, fewer in number, and have often near worldwide distribution. It will be seen how durable are their carriers, but with other electronic communication, that could be a weakness, as Odum recognized. Did it skip? No. This hierarchy and others should be considered to be rough models made from approximations of counts, durabilities, territory, turnover time, and other qualities. They require future detailed empirical study, which might change their position in the hierarchy. I say I welcome that. I hope that other Emergy researchers will find interest in one or more of these cultural information forms and explore them, especially if you have a special interest or specialist knowledge, for example, in military tactics or law or social media. Here's that same hierarchy in the format of the nested hierarchy of information cycles. And here is a piece of that, as you saw before. Rightmost objects typically have greater feedback control. It could be very useful to evaluate these. When science competes with economics or government or the forces of the military, it may not always be persuasive. Emergy analyses of these scales would be a way to understand that. I like this long quote by Odum's because it shows that he was thinking very much in line with the objects in this diagram. Odum said, globally shared information has centers, usually in the most important cities, centers of business information, religious symbols, and high technology ideas increasingly have become the highest level of the hierarchy of urban civilization. Combining the high transformity of information with large energies of electricity, the communication industry through television organizes the entire system through the many hours of people watching. So apparently, Odum had a similar kind of conception with mind of important and distinct information forms in a hierarchy. To keep things short, I have taken out the text for these next hierarchies. Here we communicate with physical movement. Last, for human to human communication is offered the hierarchy of musical, rhythmic, harmonic communication. This sketch of musical forms has the same logic, with symphonic music as the highest form, with greatest cycle time and production durability, carriers, etc. Maybe obviously these hierarchies require more refinement, perhaps again by someone with expert knowledge of music or dance or sport or whatever. So back to my list. Here we are. For the concentrations of money and perhaps for a portion of the computer software hierarchy that you will see, I have coined the term enabler. An enabler is a form of human communication that enables some other cultural process. In the case of finance, money concentrations are enablers of the economic system. This again is my hierarchy of economic enablers, the forms of money concentrations. And next, virtual object creation. This is a hierarchy of software programs. Virtual objects are created with application programs. Virtual objects like calendars and phone books and so on that we have in our computers, we still use the old names for them. Therefore, they are virtual objects. Yeah, these first two, miscellaneous apps and application programs. Virtual objects are produced in the two left scales of this hierarchy, utilizing programming language that are produced in the third scale. The rightmost two scales are necessary to permit the execution of all the other programs. We may want to label the rightmost scales also enablers. They make possible the production of the virtual objects of culture. You can see that I thought about this hierarchy some with my background in computer science. I know what software is, what's out there, how it works. So I made a stab here at creating this hierarchy with these pieces. I put more effort into that. Next, manufactured objects are clearly objects of cultural and thus information production. Odum referred to them in the phrase as information coupled to hardware. They are therefore included here as another hierarchy of information forms. And last, occupations are the information component of economic production. Quickly, let's add the money hierarchy to each of those. We can ask which production process is paid for with money and how does that increase? So pull out that part right there and put it above these hierarchies. Here you can see that no money is paid for conversation or social media. So no money is paid back here to these two columns. Now, there are no free goods in manufacturing. Okay, there's still money paid back over here. Unless that scale should be extended to the left, perhaps with household meals production as a further to the left scale in the manufacturing hierarchy, in which money is not paid. No money is paid for play on the left here. I said for social dance. No money is paid again on the left here for ritual drums. Money is obviously paid for each of these. These are the money, my money, pools of money. And money is paid for these unless you consider the work you do on your own computer configuration as a type of coding, which would then also be further to left as another scale. No money paid for that. I wish it was. Okay, conclusions. Odum's ideas about information are potentially of great interest and value, but they are dispersed throughout his writing. So the first goal of this paper, if it were said in Odumese, was the extraction and concentration of those ideas with the intention of generating feedback control to you all. His theories of information did not appear at once and in whole, but emerged and evolved together with his entire energy systems program. This paper has attempted to expose the main themes of his theories of information and to draw them together, to concentrate them into a form digestible to systems researchers that will hopefully be influential. The second goal of the paper was to build on Odum's information cycle with my model of a nested hierarchy of cultural information. I argued that information objects produced at each scale are in essence alike because each is an extracted configuration of the world, what information is, and each has a similar function to feedback, control, and services, what information does. While all objects of information feedback control, I argue that these scales that cycle slowly, producing durable objects of high fidelity communication, are the most influential in society. My final goal of the paper was to attempt to build with not only Odum's ideas about information, but more generally with his energy systems theories. For that, I focused on maximum M-power and the hierarchy principle, including his first two corollaries, the materials hierarchy and the money hierarchy. In an effort to build with Odum's energy theories, his ideas about the information of energy hierarchies was applied to explain the formation of the nested hierarchy of cultural information forms and the hierarchy of manufactured objects. As a result, two additional corollaries to the fifth energy law were proposed, the hierarchies of cultural information and manufactured objects. I wish to end the talk with one more quotation from Dr. Odum, or almost end. First, I say this about what we call free will. We choose the stories that we tell, the blogs that we write, the rituals that we create, the topics that we teach, the pop music we sing, the movies that we make, the research that we conduct, the deals that we sign, the laws that we write, the jobs that we take, and the machines that we make in our factories. But in a world that is endlessly self-organizing for maximum M-power, we ask which choices or behaviors or commodities will recur, will become part of the larger system of culture, people, culture, and nature. Odum said, individual choices are a means for exploring alternatives so that humanity as a whole finds the patterns that maximize the system's energy flow. Most people are accustomed to thinking of human behavior as the cause of behavior of the larger systems. They have difficulty realizing that patterns of the system can draw from the individuals the behavior that helps the system track maximum empower through competition of variant patterns for survival. In Odum's information theory, people are not robots and nature is not a machine. Instead, there is great complexity and contingency as self-organization occurs simultaneously at multiple scales in the energy transformation hierarchy of nature and culture. And yet, pattern emerges in nature and human behavior when viewed from the larger scales of space and time. Pattern that rewards the system with energy, as he said, patterns of the system that can draw from the individuals the behavior that helps the system track maximum empower. At nearly every scale can be found information, either the genetic information of life or the cultural information of humans. When we look at genetic information, we should expect to find function, and we typically do. When we look at cultural information, we should do the same, but we rarely do. How do the many scales of cultural information function to feedback for maximum empower? When studying culture, I think that is the question to ask, the question that Odum would expect us to ask. In my hierarchies of cultural information, that is the question that I'm always thinking about. What is the function of cultural information? What are the functions of these distinct scales of information? And over evolutionary time, why have they appeared? Can energy systems thinking help to answer those questions? Can systems modeling help to answer those questions? Can Emergy help to quantify and answer those questions? The point of these papers has been largely to frame those questions, to use Odum's ideas about systems and energy and hierarchy to conceive of culture in a way that I think Odum would recognize, and then to begin to try to empirically answer those big questions, again, about people, nature, and culture. The end. Still there? Okay, I see faces.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Due to the fact that we've gone an hour and 50 minutes, Craig has
shorter than last week.
Yeah, Craig
Sorry,
has
Dr. Brown.
Given a couple of questions over there. I suggest everyone that if you have questions or discussion with Tom, that you do it through the Emergy listserv, unless there's something just really burning right now that needs to be answered. We'll call this webinar to the end. Anybody with a burning question that they would like to ask Tom, or point they'd like to make? Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming.
Great to see everyone. Take care.
Good to see you. Okay. Bye. Ah, there's people. Bye, human beings. I now see instead of names. Okay. Bye, y'all.
Okay. Take care.